It was a late night at the office. I had an important report for a meeting in the morning that had to be ready. I watched the number of my colleagues dwindle as the hours passed. After a few hours, the office grew quiet as the last employee left. Around 2 a.m, I decided to call it a night, as I needed to get some sleep for the meeting. I gripped the handle on my vehicle and swung the door open, throwing the report on the passenger seat. I practically fell into my seat, exhausted from the long day. I took a deep breath of the fresh air before I shut the door. The air smelled of pine as the office is located in a remote, wooded area. I shut the door. The sound of crickets became muffled. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a few deep breaths. I stuck the key into the ignition and turned. My engine made a roar, startling the pigeons in the parking lot. I glanced at the fuel gauge, which rested at the quarter tank mark. I shifted the car into gear and pressed slightly on the gas pedal, causing the car to roll forward. I swiveled the wheel right and began to glide towards the exit, an almost euphoric experience due to the somber day I just had. I hit the road and began to drive back to my place. The thought of my bed filled my mind with joy, knowing that soon I could rest. It was quiet, deathly quiet. The sound of crickets ceased. The occasional crow squawk would break the silence. I peered at my radio for a moment. I was aware that it was broken, but attempted to switch it on, something to keep me occupied. Of course, nothing happened. I let out a sigh and peered up back to the road. The sense of exhaustion rolled over me as I turned my head. My heart skipped a beat as a deer bolted in front of the car. I swerved sharply, narrowly avoiding it. I corrected myself and peered into the rear view, watching the deer prance away into the dark expanse of the forest. I continued driving, attempting to catch my breath. "Fucking deer," I muttered between breaths. Mile after mile, the dense forest began to get thinner and thinner. Eventually, I reached a small suburban development. Plots of dirt with construction equipment surrounded the streets, only being broken by the occasional newly built house. The only thing that brightened the streets were the street lamps, emitting a soft glow on the sidewalks and asphalt beneath them. As I continued driving through the development, I spotted a man walking on the sidewalk. He was wearing a black jacket with blue jeans. He had a noticeable hunch and looked around 60 years old. He sported a prominent grey mustache with mutton chops and had long, greasy hair. Weird, I thought to myself. As I inched past, he stopped in his tracks and watched my car pass. I began to feel a bit creeped out but brushed it off, figuring that late night walks in the area were fairly common. I continued driving home, battling with my droopy demeanor. I began to see more people on the road as I approached the city center. I spotted a 24/7 fast food joint and began to realize that I hadn't eaten since lunch. The sudden grumble of my stomach decided for me. I flicked my blinker and turned into the establishment's parking lot, merging into the drive-through lane. A raspy voice spoke over the intercom speaker.
"What do you want?"
Little rude, eh? I thought to myself. I ordered a burger with fries and a large fountain drink. I drove into the large open parking lot across the street and parked, folding my burger out of the wrapper. As I opened my mouth to take a bite, a drop of mayo landed on my shirt. "Ah, fuck," I muttered out of frustration. I began to rummage the bag for a napkin, but had no luck. Suddenly, a tapping sound filled my left ear. I shot toward the window, staring at the man outside of it. I took a deep breath and prepared to lower my window, thinking it was a hobo looking for change. A car approached to my right from the road opposite the man. The headlights illuminated his face. I was frozen in place. It was the man from earlier. His distinctive appearance was unmistakable. Adrenaline began to surge. I reached for the window button, my hand noticeably shaking. The window began to creak downward. Can I help you, sir?" I said, trembling over my words. He stared at me for a moment. His eyes were yellow and his pupils were grey. After a while of no response, I asked again. "Sir?" His demeanor changed, almost like he snapped out of a trance, suddenly animated.
"Who dropped this?"
he exclaimed. His voice was raspy and his speech was slurred and unclear. He lifted his hand. It was full of grime and his fingernails were long and yellow, chipped at its ends. Pinched between his index finger and his thumb was a beige napkin. He steadily swayed his arm into my car and dropped it on my lap. It fluttered as it fell. "Oh, thanks," I said, trembling once again. He cracked a smile. His teeth were yellow and grey, and some of them were missing. His face returned to its previous position. His feet dragged on the ground as he turned, letting out a scrape. I stared at him as he shuffled away. I put my window up and stared at the napkin, which now lay on my lap. It contained the grime from his hands, rendering it unusable. I picked it up carefully and started to put my window down again, preparing to dispose of it. I noticed a message written on the back. I spun the napkin back toward my eyes, reading the message. "You're welcome, Tyler." How does he know my name? How does this fucking dude know my name? I thought to myself. With a mix of anger and uneasiness, I peered back towards the direction where the man was last seen. The only thing I saw was deer, staring at my vehicle. I froze. I threw the napkin out the window and threw the burger into the bag. I put the car into reverse and slammed on the gas pedal, sending the car flying backward, the tires letting out a squeal. I shifted into drive and drove to the exit. I turned onto the street and began to go 30 over. I didn't even get a mile down the road when blue and red flashed behind me. I felt like breaking down and crying. The cop stayed in his cruiser for a moment. My heart was racing. I heard the door open behind me. I peered into the rear view and saw the officer approaching my window. "License and registration, sir." I don't know what came over me. I practically screamed in his face. "Someone is following me! Some fucking hobo! He knows my name! He knows my fucking name!" The officer was taken aback. "Is that the reason you were speeding, sir?" he questioned. "Yes, I'm sorry. I'm really stressed. I have a huge report in the morning. I almost hit a deer, and now I'm being followed by a man that somehow knows my name. I've seen him twice, miles apart." The cop stared at me. "Sir, have you had anything to drink tonight?" he said. "What? No, I'm telling the truth. You have to believe me," I said, frustrated. The cop sighed and began to speak when his radio chimed.
Unit 12, this is dispatch. We have a 1033 at the hospital. Suspect is armed and firing shots. Male, mid-60s, grey jacket and jeans. Proceed with caution. All units be on high alert and respond immediately. Over.
The man stared at me. "Slow down, please. Have a nice night," he said with urgency. He began to run back to his car. His siren wailed, and he sped away down the street. I pulled off the side of the street and began to drive again. The hospital was on the same route I had to take to get home. After another few miles, I approached the hospital. Red and blue reflected on its tall stone face. A cop was directing traffic away toward a smaller side road. In front of me was a truck that opted to turn around instead. As I approached, a few muffled gunshots rang out from the hospital. The cop ducked and began to fling her arms towards the side road. I sped off onto it, looking into my rear view. I looked back in front of me, correcting my speed as I continued. The shots subsided. As I approached a small intersection on the small road, a man stepped onto the sidewalk. Not just any man. The man. As he stepped in front of the car, he froze. He lifted his jacket to reveal a pistol tucked into his waistband. He turned to face me. He slowly lifted a pistol. He held it by his side, slowly raising the barrel in my direction. I slammed on the gas, running into him, sending him flying over the top of my car. My windshield was shattered, making it difficult to see. I crashed into the curb and hit a pole. I began to hyperventilate and cry, my hands shaking terribly. I jolted my eyes toward the rearview mirror and peered at the road behind me. Laying in the middle of the road, in a pool of blood, was a deer, scraped and bloodied. I stepped out, starting to believe I was hallucinating. I approached the deer carcass, staring at its regrettable state. I wiped the tears from my eyes, covering them for a moment. "What the fuck is going on?" I screamed, Fed up with the situation at hand, I closed my eyes in the hopes that I would wake up in my bed, hoping that this was all a bad dream. I slowly opened my eyes. Laying on the deer's head was a napkin with a note on it, the same kind as the fast food joint. I kneeled to read it. "You're welcome, Tyler." I began to shake even more. I started backing away and ran to my car. Suddenly, I felt a swift kick to my legs. I fell to the ground, landing on my face, causing my nose to bleed. I rolled over and stared at the night sky. The clouds danced with each other. The man's face entered my view. He was smiling. What the fuck do you want?" I muttered, my mouth filling with the blood from my nose. He slowly began to crack a smile, his face almost distorting. Pinched between his index and thumb was the napkin. He dropped it on my chest. He returned his arm to his side. "Good luck on that report, Tyler," he said in his raspy voice. He walked away and disappeared behind some dumpsters. I picked up the napkin off my chest and wiped my nose. I threw the napkin to my side and closed my eyes. The pain began to subside. I opened my eyes and rubbed my hand across my nose. No blood. I sat up and looked around. My car was neatly parked on the side of the road. I took a deep breath and stood up. I peered around for a moment before walking toward my car. I opened the door and sat in the driver's seat. I closed the door, the sound of the outside being silenced. I tried to make sense of the situation, but failed. I looked at the windshield. Not a crack in sight. I put the car in gear and started to drive home. When I pulled into the driveway, I began to weep. Everything that just happened messed with me. I started to eat the food, which was now ice cold. I was scared to exit the vehicle. I didn't want that man to come back. I eventually got the courage and opened the door. Stepping out, my knees were shaking. I slid the key into the door and swung it open. I locked my door and ran into my bedroom, jumping on the bed. My heart rate began to slow at the realization that I was home. I was safe. I picked up the remote and flicked on the TV. The news channel was reporting the shooting that took place. The reporter was standing next to the barricade where the cop was standing, describing the confirmed casualties. She suddenly put her hand up to her ear, as if she was receiving info. She looked into the camera and began to speak.
"We now have confirmed the identity of the shooter. The man is 64-year-old Michael Langster. The police have confirmed that the man is dead and was taken down by police on the 5th floor."
On the right hand of the screen, the image of the shooter was shown. It was the man. I couldn't sleep that night. The meeting was rescheduled due to the shooting. I still can't fathom what happened that night. I still see deer behind my house in the woods, mostly at night. I always fear that it's him and that he's watching me, waiting to torment me again.